you
not a requirement.
about the railway, isn't he?
Yeah.
So where's that?
Without courtesy, not out of the requirement.
Oh, so he's a bloody
Fair enough.
All right.
Are we on?
Yeah.
I mean, right, to the Common Seal Chair, I move that you, with due ceremony, affix the Common Seal.
And Paul will second it. All those in favour of fixing the common seal? There's a recommendation. And it's moved unanimously. Information items, Clifton to Tonga item 8.
Chris.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
Excellent. Be nice and quick. So this is a regular update from the Coastal Hazards Strategy. So after each Coastal Hazards Strategy, we'll bring an update to Council, and all councils involved receive the same update. So the last meeting was quite short. Most of the focus was on a funding workshop. But the key points from the last meeting was to confirm the terms of reference, and that was in fact brought to this council for our approval on the 19th of December last year. And we also added an additional member, and again at that same council meeting on the 19th of December that occurred. Also received a memo around the port resource consent, and Wayne gave an update about the sand engine for West Shore and the Napier City Council's Provincial Growth Fund application for that. And the rest of the time was really spent in a funding workshop working through the issues of how we should collect rates, who should collect what and why, the regulatory framework that might influence that, the discussion around the contributory fund, should we be collecting money prior to undertaking any works, and looking at other sources of funding, and also looking at the asset ownership questions. And that discussion really provided insight from the various councils onto some of the work that the joint working group needed to continue with to bring to the next meeting. So quite brief. Peter, I don't know if you've got anything you want to...
I was going to say, Peter, anything you want to add?
I think the summary meeting notes are pretty much self-explanatory, and happy to answer any questions about it. The workshop did expose some significant issues that need to be worked through in regard to what a funding model might look like that'll stand the test of time, and there certainly was a large range of views around the table expressed amongst various councillors who were there. We've done quite a bit of work since to try and move that forward, and I think we may have charted a way that that might work, and TAG now have some guidance on how to take that forward to the next joint committee meeting in March. I guess just one other thing really, and that is around triggers for actions on the coast, and I guess that's the other area where there's what I would regard as very little knowledge. It's new to New Zealand to think about these things, and when you start thinking about what might be a trigger for an action to do protective works or whatever, or retreat, what is it going to be? Is it going to be because the insurance industry withdraws their protection for houses? Is it because you get 4 flood events in 6 months? Or, I mean, what does a trigger look like? And there's been very little discussion about that in this entire project, but it's looming large, and it's a really important subject to have a discussion about. So I think they're, for me, the two critical issues that need to be considered and developed quite a lot during the course of this year.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Chris. Any questions? I just had one just to kick us off. I've always thought that the market will lead this as a trigger, as you say. Is there any examples in the Hawke's Bay where it has, like the insurance industry?
Well, actually, Chris, do you want to... You've had a meeting, haven't you?
I haven't met with the Insurance Council yet, but that's something we intend to explore.
Is there any communities that can't get insurance?
not that we're aware of.
Okay.
Well, it actually did happen, Chair, after the Kaikoura earthquake. The insurance industry just randomly went around New Zealand and withdrew any offer of new insurance in a number of postcode areas. That's how broad scale it was. And it just so happened that one of the areas that they decided to withdraw insurance was parts of our coastline. And I'm aware of a house that was put up for sale at that time.
Oh, so there are examples.
Yes, there were going to be 5 people who were going to make bids on that house, and 4 of them withdrew because they couldn't get insurance, and the 5th one was cashed up and able to make an offer and got the house $50,000 cheaper than anyone else thought it would sell for. So that's the sort of behaviour we can expect to become more prevalent if the insurance industry has knee-jerk reactions to the risks that they face.
No, when.
When, that's right.
Any other questions? Well, do we have a move of the recommendations then?
I'm happy to.
I'm happy to move. Chair.
Peter will move.
Second.
Paul will second. Do you wish to speak further, Peter? Paul, do you wish to speak?
No.
All those in favour? Aye. Move. Thank you. Item 9, significant activities.
Take it as read, Chair. Take any questions from council?
Any questions? Paul,
Thank you, Chair.
50, is it?
Sorry?
50?
Yeah, okay, getting there. Just again, abbreviations. On page 29, under strategic planning, ICM.
Integrated catchment management.
Right, okay.
Missing the B.
Missing the B.
What about WQE? What's that?
Sorry?
WQE.
Water quality and ecology.
Number 9, this is regarding the WCO that the tribunal has directed any expert evidence to be presented by 20th of January. Do we know that that's actually happened?
We certainly have submitted ours, yes, our expert evidence.
But you don't know yet whether other parties have submitted theirs?
Yes, they have, and
You're going through.
You go to the EPA website, it's all up there.
It's cool, okay. On number 14 on page 30, again, TWT, simulating TWTG applications.
It's the Tuki Water Task Force group, I think.
Yep.
Okay, and a GETS notification, GETS.
It's the Government Electronic Tender Service.
Bloody hell! I mean,
Yep. No.
Okay.
Point taken. I actually did have to inquire as into what one of these was this week myself. So I have noted that we need to avoid providing you with acronyms which are not known to you in the future.
You could put it down as an Alzheimer prevention process.
You could do, yeah.
Stimulate the brain to make you go down new and different neural pathways.
So I try to do a jigsaw every day. Number 28 on page 31, monitor ecological effects of new herbicides, which I assume will occur, has been planned for February. So we're going to get a paper at some stage which sort of outlines what that's all about.
Look, potentially, although this is probably an opportune moment to raise with you that our science staff got the distinct impression some time ago that the council didn't want to see the endless stream of science reports that they used to provide to council. There was some frustration expressed by councillors about receiving all these reports, and so they've stopped providing them basically. So the science work continues and there's reports being produced on a fairly regular basis.
Yep.
I was a bit uneasy about that on the basis that I'm not sure that's really what you meant. I know there was frustration about getting science reports that then didn't have a follow-on in terms of what's the policy response, the operational response, and what are we doing. And it's reasonably difficult for us to provide a full-blown package of work on an ongoing basis in relation to every bit of science is monitored, what's the policy response, etc. So we haven't really resolved this. So no, at this stage I don't think there's any intention necessarily of you to receive that. But if
Well, I was just curious. The topic interests me. New ecological effects of new herbicides. So, if there is a report that's been produced by that, I'd be interested in getting a copy when it comes out. I don't, and that's I think was necessary, because I think it's,
We did discuss this in putting the agenda together for the next Environment Committee meeting, this particular topic of what kind of reports, what science reports, et cetera, to come forward. And I think where we got to in that discussion, I don't know if you've heard about that, was that, well, yes, on the one hand, councilors, and this is me representing what I thought we were after, would certainly want to see some regular report. Maybe it's twice a year, maybe it's only once a year, of what is the science program, what's the strategy, what are the major pieces of work being done, but that there had also been pushback that we were often bringing forward fairly arcane pieces of work with a great deal of detail, very unevenly presented in terms of quality and so forth, and not taking us to any point of conclusion. So what?
Yeah.
Is there an action required here? Have we discovered something that we ought to be alarmed about? Or have we seen something that shifts, that suggests we need to change a policy? And so what I said to Ian basically was, in those instances where there is something that we've been looking at that leads us to question how we're doing our business, then sure, that deserves to be on a committee agenda and brought forward. Otherwise, let's list these things, and people who are interested in digging deeper into one or another of them can. And as I say, at least once a year, we report on the whole caboodle of it. Here's all that's going on. We're spending X million dollars on this kind of work, and there should be some accounting for it. So that's sort of where it got to in the last iteration.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'll follow up with Ian and we'll ensure that something of that nature comes forward.
yep, okay.
Carry on, Paul.
Right.
We're getting to where we're all going, I think.
Yep, 39, the collie minder machine.
Yep.
James, we had a brief discussion about this morning. I couldn't recall, are we actually trialling it in Pandora Pond, or is it we're looking at it?
I'm not sure whether the machine has arrived. It was imminent, so we have come to this arrangement with NIWA to borrow this machine from them. It's a $100,000 piece of kit, but it does provide this very, very quick testing of E. coli. So it's something that we want to trial and then consider whether it's something we put up for funding for purchasing and having to hand.
I think that's a really good news story that we could perhaps take advantage of if we had to put our minds to it. In terms of a media release and stuff.
Yeah, look, I'll have a chat to the science team about it, because they may want to be a little circumspect about how much promotion until we're confident that it's giving us the results we need. But I quite agree, if we can get to a position where we can provide much more confidence to the community about when it's appropriate to swim in Pandora, that would be a good thing.
Yep, cool. Number 40, we've got this NIWA glider, which sounds like something from James Bond, but deployed in the bay. I take it that's the Hawke's Bay?
Correct.
Okay. Number 43, an outdoor burning tool. I take it.
Just while you're at it,
Yeah.
Is that an airborne glider?
No, it's submarine, so it works on currents under the water. It's a little bit like a drone that you put in the water and.
Really is James Bond.
Thank you.
Yeah. Number 43, the outdoor burning tool. I take it that's some sort of working towards a regulation around the burning off of waste.
So it's an app, and the idea is that orchardists will download the app and it will give them information day to day about whether or not today's a good day to burn or not to burn.
How do I hack it?
Rex has got that sorted.
I just want to hack it. No,
Make sure they're not burning around me.
no, just a flat no.
And I take it then once that's developed there'll be some sort of
Promotion.
promotion of it.
Correct.
Number 48, WIS busy with upcoming irrigation season.
That's the Water Information Service, so that's our staff that work with the irrigation community.
Right. Are they those people that came back and did that presentation last year about how efficient irrigators were and what?
Correct.
Okay, yep, cool. the number 65, the Tutaikuri stop pack extension upstream from Puketapu, the private funding, HBR design and construction stop bank eventually to become part of HBFC. Yes, I take it that's the Hiratonga Plains
Flood protection scheme.
flood protection scheme, right?
Flood control.
So it's been funded, but it's been built privately, but then we're going to take over the funding of that. So that's all through targeted rates, isn't it? So
Yeah, so the capital is funded from the private enterprise.
Yeah.
And then we take that asset over. It's built to the standard that we require. And then the operations and maintenance is funded out of a targeted rate. And that property is then rated for flood protection.
accordingly, right? Okay. 66 UTTFCS work is progressing. What's UTTFCS?
Took flood control scheme.
Right. And that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Well, so very good. Chief,
Peter,
you got
Fenton, then Tom.
95%.
So, firstly, a comment. When you see the range of things that are underway here and that our staff are involved in, it's an extraordinary list and certainly underpins the comment that Rick made this morning about the risk of losing the wood for the trees. So, I think the initiative that we talked about will be a good one. I have a question around what number is it? It's the ICM groundwater science. The Ruat Tanawha groundwater models have been reviewed externally and found not fit for purpose for simulating TWTG applications. And then it goes on and says, preparation of new model inputs and updated data is underway. At the risk of opening Pandora's box, what are the implications of this for Plan Change 6?
Well, the policy is the policy, and the policy was based on the previous groundwater model. And until we've got a new groundwater model, we're not in a particularly strong position to revise the plan. So this goes to the multi-year work program that will ultimately lead us to a revision of Plan Change 6. And I think, part of the argument for deferring the dates on the minimum flows was that there is ongoing science development being done, both in terms of the groundwater model and the monitoring network, but also in terms of potential aquifer recharge as a bit of a plan B. So this is all part of that work, and the Tuki Water Task Force is effectively overseeing that work that's going on.
So it's highly likely that we will revise Plan Change 6 well within the 10-year normal review period.
Look, my suspicion is that within the 10-year window. Certainly when you go back to when the science was prepared, leading into the Board of Inquiry, you're starting to go back 5 years from today, and we're talking about several years until this work is completed. So, yeah.
I would note that at the time, whether that work was fit for purpose was seriously challenged. Yeah. And the staff pledged on its heart that it was just wonderful, peachy.
Well, look, I think it was based on best available information at the time.
Fenton.
Right.
And then you, Tom.
Three quick ones. Lake Tutera, the air curtain not looking a bit shabby. When do we make a decision on whether that extends into the main lake?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, and Ian's not available today, so we have to come back to you on that one.
My understanding on that was nothing will be decided until after this full season had gone through. So, yeah.
52, 53, Whakaki, where are we going with that? It sounds like there's a range of support or otherwise there for that affecting the funding.
Again, Ian's not here. The funding is still.
I'll take it up with him.
It's still on the table, and the very last piece of information I had on this a week or so back was that there was still some optimism. I don't know, Petty, whether you want to give an update on.
There's a meeting pending for the 7th, and that's to resolve the last ones who need to consent, which is at the western end of the MBTA end. Right. And they're hoping that between now and then, and at that meeting, then they can resolve all the consents so that a modified application can go back into MFE.
Beautiful. Music to my ears. Thank you. And 59, New Hawke River Road. What's going on here? We had a plan, now we're getting another plan, now it looks like we're still planning.
Is we've reviewed the design.
Yeah.
There's been a proper design done of 2 options. That's a couple of weeks away from being finalised. We'll then price up those 2 options and talk to Waiteroa about budget implications, and then commence work after that. But we had some, I guess, some concerns about the level of design work that had been done previously. So we've had a good look at it, and I'm happy that it's been looked at.
Can I just add, just to be a bit more frank about it, the solution that was first designed up was a bit rough and ready and had every risk of not being durable beyond the next major weather event, so potentially throwing good money after bad. So we've resolved that we would rather do the job properly and make sure that we're not coming back to do this again in short order. So the extensiveness of the works has grown a bit, therefore the costs have grown a bit, but we think that we're better to do the job properly once rather than do a patch-up job.
My concern is we price it out of the game. That's where we're heading.
Well, there's a risk around that.
But gold plating it. Well, my humble opinion.
I think part of it's around our reputation and work that we undertake needs to be enduring and properly designed, and you know, what space do we want to be in terms of working in our river spaces. I guess there's a question to be asked if we work down to a price.
Tom?
Disagree.
So not knowing what number 59 was, I had a question about whatever happened to the slip that created a new lake, and
Mangapoiki.
what's all become of that?
Effectively stabilised. There's
Got a new lake.
There's a new lake, and
It's for sale.
and it's
If you can get up the middle road.
So everybody's copacetic. It's all.
yeah. So the lake flows over the dam structure, and everything's stable as far as everybody's aware.
I could update that, Chair. I spoke to the engineer at the Whitehall show. They're going to lower it about 1 metre, my understanding, to make it durable.
Oh, is that right?
For a range of issues, one being safety almost, to make it last. So I haven't been in there yet. It's a pretty stunning place.
Yeah, no, I'd love to go in. They're going to plant at the Cockies are.
You can fly me in, Chair, on the 14th. I'll go with you.
We could organise that. Peter?
I'll move the report be accepted.
No. I've got one thing just before you do. High levels of phosphate in Fatuma. I mean, how high? Just how serious is that? I mean, we just see this data will be more thoroughly analysed.
Huge bird life there.
Is that what it's doing?
Well, it's both inflows and outflows. So, but look, there's a huge amount of phosphorus used in the catchment, so it's not altogether surprising. I mean, I think this is one that if you want some
Inflows worse than the outflow. Oh, well, I wouldn't just.
well, it's high in both inflows and outflows, right? So I think if you want some more advice on that, we'd probably be best
Not
to get
like our scientists
Andy
that
Hicks
use the
to-
word extremely. Okay, any other questions? Do we have a move up to accept that report? Peter? Rick?
Second, Chair.
I know, Rick's on something else. Paul, second. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Panpack.
Impact. I've got Wayne and Malcolm here, if they could come up. So perhaps just as they do, we've set out in the paper a fairly explicit and extensive chronology of events leading up to the current situation, and the paper was late because we tried to incorporate the outputs of a meeting with PanPac that was held last Thursday. So the paper gives essentially an up-to-date assessment of where we're at. So I won't go through the paper in any detail other than take it as read, and we can answer questions that you may have.
Once again, I haven't got the paper.
Sorry, so it was a late paper that was emailed on Friday, Alan. Did we send out paper copies?
No, it was on the email. You had to print it off.
Pigeonholes.
Right, there's been a lot of email correspondence around this. Any questions?
Oh, well, Should we kick it off then, Chair?
Well, you might, Paul.
Oh, that's quite all right. I'll refer to paragraph 2 and the last sentence, the last line there, last sentence in there. Each of these complaints was either not confirmed following a site inspection by council, police and response staff, or where observed was attributed to either an algal bloom or outfall discharge being pushed inshore. I appreciate that there was a thing of the algal bloom back in May or whenever it was, so that's fine. But if it's attributed to an outfall discharge being pushed inshore, doesn't the consent condition state something along the lines that the discharge should only be like 150 metres from the outfall out at sea, and that it should only be at certain concentrations up to that point?
That's right.
That's right. So if it was attributed to be an outfall discharge being pushed inshore, was any testing undertaken of those discharges at that point to see that they met the consent conditions?
No, certainly not.
Why not?
It would have been impractical for a start. And also the number of complaints which were perhaps attributed to outfall discharge being pushed inshore had not reached a sufficient level or number of that that we would consider that there might be an issue, which would mean we'd have to get a boat and go out there and sample and carry on to that effect.
So what you're suggesting there is that when you went out and saw these things, this was before September. It's not even relating to the current challenges that you've got out there. You saw discharges being pushed inshore. You didn't. No one bothered to check to see if they actually were in breach of the consent conditions or not.
No, that's not quite correct the way you've described it either. The observations were made and they were noted, and at no point did we consider that there was I suppose sufficient enough for us to to continue an investigation as such to see whether they are either in breach or not of their resource consent.
So no one actually. So that's because no one tested it, was it? Because there's a certain requirement in the consent condition that they had the concentrations outside 150 metres from the outfall discharge have to be at a certain level, isn't it?
Yes, certainly. But then to confirm that it actually is outfall discharge, you would then have to sample.
And why were no samples taken? Because it was too difficult.
Oh, yes, too difficult.
So why do we have a consent condition?
If I may finish, too difficult, and also the level of possible breach, I suppose, had not reached a sufficient level for us to consider doing that.
So if I'm travelling along the road at 140 k's an hour, I'm breaking the law, and I get pulled over and I get pinged for it. And yet PAMPAC can have discharges that are breaching their consents, you observe them to breach their consents, and yet you do nothing about it. So you took no testing, you did nothing about it?
No, we didn't.
Right, next question. Bloody hell.
Chair, are we going to go through a court process here, or because I'm not sure this is adding any value to this conversation? The manner in which the councillor's behaving to start with.
Yeah, Paul, you could just calm it down, but he has a right to...
of course he does, but he knows the answers to these questions. That's what I'm getting.
I didn't know the answers to the question. I was not aware that Wayne had not actually even tested anything. I asked him if he had.
Well, you know,
and he was getting...
Tone everything down, thank you, councillor. We're not in a court case here.
Right. Are we not?
No.
Hey, guys, I'm chairing this meeting if you didn't say.
Well, chair it.
Well, I am, and I'm letting him have his say.
Right.
But
at some stage...
Just
calm it down. Okay. Paragraphs 4 and 5. Yeah, this is relating to the outfall flow pipe being broken. And one of the investigating officers went out and made an assumption that it was a algal bloom issue. This was on the 15th, right? Which later it was found to be incorrect in the following day.
Well, no, I dispute that. It wasn't found to be incorrect the following day. A new assessment was made the next day, and the officer that attended was quite pointed in saying this is completely different to what I saw yesterday, and it was obviously much more important, and it looks like it was a leak in the pipe and action was taken. So without somebody being there when the pipe was breached, you can't say exactly when it happened, but if I was a betting man, I'd say it was sometime on the 15th or 16th, and if I would say probably the 16th rather than the 15th.
Okay, I'm not going to dispute when the pipe may or may not have broken, right? That's on. That's
the question about what the officer did, is it?
Yep, because under 4.2, you've got the duty officer alerted PANPAC and informed that on previous advice from Regional Council of Coastal Scientists and the lack of evidence on the day that it was likely to be another algal bloom, right? So there was an assumption made that it was another algal bloom because in the past that is what has had happened. Is that correct?
There was an assumption that it was an algal bloom, yes.
Okay. So what other investigations or how much confidence can we have that when an officer goes out to investigate a police complaint that they're not going to make an assumption about what the cause is?
Well, they're always going to make an assumption because that's their job. And while hindsight's a wonderful thing, let's use hindsight here. And on all those 6 complaints that are talked about here, only one of them, the one on the 16th, actually ended up being a leakage. So I would say that the assumptions that the officers made on each occasion were reasonably sound.
I would beg to differ on that, sir, but that's okay. Right.
Well, excuse me then, on each of those 6 previous occasions, were there leaks from the pipe?
How do you know when you didn't investigate through them? Because that's what you said under paragraph 2.
I think the circumstances make it quite clear that there was a leak on the 16th, and it was unclear and unsubstantiated, and probably not on those previous occasions up to that point.
Okay, so on paragraph 9, let's move on from that. The last thing is you've got PANPAC staff are present on the beach informing residents. This is on the 18th September, or whenever.
Yep.
How many people did they actually speak to on the beach, do you know?
I wouldn't have a clue, no.
Wouldn't have a clue. Okay, so that's fine.
Do you think I should have an answer to that?
I think if you've put that in the paper as an explanation as to what was going on, yes, I think you should have an idea of how many people we've spoken to by PANPAC. Right? If I go on to paragraph 31.
You run through, can I interrupt at 22?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good idea as we go through. 22 then, Tom?
My question, 22, I think the last word should be
correct.
HBRC.
Correct. Yes, that's a typo. I spotted that.
So that we are now independently checking what the nature of the contamination is and how severe or otherwise we regard it to be?
Yes, essentially it's cross-checking that the sample results from the samples taken by PANPAC were accurate.
And so throughout this, we've been operating on a assessment that whatever it is, it's not, quote, bad enough to be taking more drastic measures. We seem to be
correct.
Accepting that this is a tolerable amount of effluent or whatever it is that is polluting near shore.
I don't think that's quite the assessment that's been made. The assessment that's been made is that the level of contamination is I suppose in simple terms, it's no worse than what the consented quality of the effluent that the PANPAC already consented to discharge, albeit that it's actually discharging close to shore rather than out in the mixing zone.
So is it your judgment that the basic issue is that it's simply cosmetically disturbing?
No, that's not my judgment at all. I didn't make that judgment, but that could be open for discussion by anybody within the organisation as to the reasons why the regional council has taken that stance.
No, look, it would have a potential human health impact. So we know that the dive crews that were working on the outfall did experience skin rashes as a consequence of being exposed to the high concentration of discharge coming out at the point of the leakage. And so it's not benign, but the assessment we've made is that the health and environmental impacts are sufficiently low in impact to justify not shutting the mill down.
And we allude to the DHB being copacetic on that score. Have they gone on the record officially in some way about that?
They've made public statements in the media to that effect. I've spoken to Dr. Jones in the last week on this and confirmed that in terms of shutting the mill down, they're on the same page as us in that regard. They are interested in further investigation as we are into, I guess, what's a bit of an anomaly, which is these reasonably high enterococci results coming out of the mill, not normally expected to be coming out based on what goes into the mill operation, although there does seem to be some international literature which suggests that pulp mills do have the ability to grow bacteria, if you like.
So further, if I mean, it seems to me on the basis of your lengthy response by email to Mr. Colas and this paper that we're absolutely certain on our end that PanPac is doing everything from a engineering and technical standpoint that it could be expected to do at this particular point in time. Is that, I mean, that's...
Well, that's the advice I've had from our staff. I don't know whether you want to make...
Yes, well, we believe so. In fact, PanPac has said to us when we had a meeting with them the other day, when we questioned them about the urgency of their response, they said, well, we think we probably could have been, 2 weeks ahead of the game. There might have been about 2 weeks of slack in there, which I imagine you would attribute that to the Christmas time. But apart from from that 2 weeks by their own admission, I think they are doing all they can.
So at the moment, you would tell us that they are doing everything that you could imagine them doing to rectify the situation?
Oh, from an engineering perspective, most certainly. And also, and I suppose, and the other side of that too is keeping the local residents informed as to what they're doing, keeping us involved with informed with what they're doing. I believe so. Yes.
All right. So that's where we are now. Now, looking back a bit, there's one thing that strikes me about this is that it has a sort of a dangerous analogy to the adequacy of the bore heads in Havelock North before there was a contamination event, where the issue eventually becomes that if more careful monitoring of compliance with the existing consents were being undertaken, the deterioration of those bore heads, et cetera, would have been recognized. Hastings would have been told to do something about it, et cetera, et cetera. What is our protocol for monitoring PanPac's, presumably the consent under which it discharges this effluent has something in it with regard to the security of the piping, whatever, the infrastructure maintenance aspect of it. Would that not be correct? There'd be something in those consents saying, keep your pipe in shape?
There are conditions which require them, the focus is probably more on the diffuser, the further out to sea, to monitor and maintain that system. When you look at the wording in relation to the pipe and its location where it's breached, it's in the past it hasn't been as specific. The wording that's coming through with the replacement consent is asking that they maintain their whole infrastructure.
So in this report, it said repeatedly that PanPac has stressed that they have no alternative other than to discharge this effluent if they want to keep the plant open.
Correct.
One would think that therefore they would have some contingency plan as to if there's a disruption in our ability to do that, here's plan B. But what they effectively are saying is there is no plan B. We either shove it out to sea or we shut down the plant. Mm-hmm. Is that good policy on our part, do you think, to allow that to be the operating situation?
I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that, Councillor. PanPac have said that they can shut down the plant. We have asked them about shutting down the plant, and they have said that if they have to, they would shut down the plant. They haven't been called upon by us to shut down the plant, so they haven't done so.
So if there were an earthquake over there, and all of a sudden, their access to the sea is impeded, then they're hosed. They're out of luck.
They would shut down the plant. Look, the mechanical pulping process uses an enormous amount of water that's just inherent in the operation, and the water's got to go somewhere. And they don't have a consent to discharge to land, and discharge to land brings with it a whole bunch of other issues. So it either goes in the sea or the operation shuts down.
So has it ever been considered that the discharge should go to land or should be otherwise dealt with?
That was traversed extensively in the most recent resource consent processes through the Environment Court.
Well, I was on the panel that made the initial hearing, and that certainly had been considered, but there's 9,000 cubic metres of water, I think, daily to dispose of, and there's pretty much no other way to do it.
Following that hearing that you were on, Councillor Bevan, that consent subsequently expired, and it has gone through a further. They've done a multi-criteria assessment of options for treating that waste, and leading into their consent application, and basically working with a community group, reached the conclusion that the best option was the coastal discharge.
So given the importance of this outfall to this company, it's worth apparently, I would think, hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of, one would think that they had a pretty robust process in place to be observing the integrity of the piping system and so forth, and undertaking the maintenance associated with that and so on and so forth. But we appear to have no involvement, we're not watching that process in any way. We're assuming as good corporate behavior, good management, that they are doing all of that.
That's not true. In this particular case with this consent, I think it's been publicised that we're undertaking an investigation on how or did PanPac undertake correct maintenance of their infrastructure, and I actually completed that investigation last night and put through a draft finding this morning, so that the CE may not have read it yet, but and I don't want to release the actual findings there, but except to say that for the length of the resource consent, PanPac have been undertaking on average of 4 times a year diving assessments of the outfall / diffuser, and it would be fair to say at this point that they have been undertaking maintenance of that infrastructure, and they have been making either repairs or adjustments to its performance whenever it has been identified.
So can I just build on that and just clarify what Malcolm was explaining before in terms of what the consent requires by way of maintenance and reporting to us is focused on effectively the section of pipeline that's within the water. The buried part of the pipeline itself doesn't have maintenance or reporting conditions on it. Now, this was built in the 1970s. There's no records that we hold of how that was approved by whom back in the 1970s. The first time the pipeline became consented by the Regional Council was in 1998, at which point in time consent conditions were placed on what was deemed to be the most at-risk part of the infrastructure, which is the diffuser and the underwater pipeline. Okay. That has been diligent diligently looked after and reported to us on a frequent basis. The underground section has no conditions associated with it, but as Malcolm explained, the new consent, which is just going through the Environment Court now has new conditions in it that will require the entire infrastructure to be maintained and reported to us in terms of that maintenance program. The in-pipe inspection in the buried section does require underwater cameras and technology, which is probably at the newer end of the spectrum, and PAMPAC are now using that technology, and I think there was actually an inspection in June of this year. So they are now undertaking in-pipe inspections with gear, but that in itself is not straightforward because they need clean water, not wastewater from the system to be able to see what's in there, and that involves an intervention. But it is fair to say, in discussion with Doug Ducker last week, that they now recognise that they have access to technology that will enable them to be more diligent in terms of inspecting the performance of those existing underground assets, and will be making an assessment around what parts of that need replacement, and that's part of the discussion with the shareholders, as I understand it, happening this week, is what does that program look like. He was very clear with me that PAMPAC will be ensuring that all of that infrastructure is in top-notch form as soon as they can practically get it. And first of all, they've got to stop the leak, but then after that, they need to make sure that they don't have any more leaks, because it's pretty clear that this company does not want this sort of leak occurring. It's bad for their reputation, and their shareholders are not particularly enthused about it either.
The pipeline is what we would call a strategic asset to them, I would presume.
Sure, yep.
And so it sounds like there's a little bit of catch-up that's happened here in terms of diligence onshore, but you're saying that there's no reason why we should feel the regional council has been slack in monitoring the situation. What has happened is effectively an act of God, it sounds like. I mean, the breakage itself, whether it's natural deterioration of a pipeline that should have been detected, or whether it is a act of God, severe storm, no one could have prevented this, it's still a little fuzzy, isn't it?
Look, I think the fact that we're putting conditions now in the new resource consent that require full infrastructure maintenance and reporting to us reflects a higher standard than was set in 1998. And so I think with the benefit of hindsight, we could have been requiring more, but in 1998 it may not have been technically practicable to do downpipe camera inspections of a pipe of this length going some hundreds of metres under Whirinaki. So look, it may just not have been an option to condition at that point in time. I don't know.
So
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, PAMPAC are a good and responsible corporate citizen. In fact, their performance is unparalleled, I believe, the larger corporates in Hawke's Bay. The report is, now I've read it, it's comprehensive. It does indicate that the authorities, are, including ourselves, are accepting of this situation, and that there is no significant public health risk. So, and I believe that our inspectorate have done what they should have done. So accordingly, I'd move that the report be received.
Sorry, Chair. I've still got a question.
We've still got questions.
We just can't shut it down just yet. But Paul, are you reasonably satisfied, or we got more questions? Does Tom cover most of your stuff?
Tom's covered a lot of my stuff. Yes, Peter may want to.
So,
well, Peter, you come in.
It says in the report here that the part of the pipe which ruptured was 2.5 metres under the surface of the seabed.
Sand, yep.
Yep. And it appears that quite a bit of the pipeline, therefore, must be well underground, essentially. Are you able to tell us how many metres are buried?
Through reading the dive reports, I think all of them without fail, bear in mind that they're looking at the diffuser, and I think at the moment the diffuser is 400 metres? 400 metres long. Before that, it was 40 metres long, and all the observations were that the original outfall pipe, apart from sometimes up to, they mentioned something like 200 millimetres, so not very long at all, was under the seabed. So the pipe itself was under the seabed, and it's the diffuser which is out. And on some occasions, I noted that parts of the diffuser were under the seabed.
You haven't really answered my question. What I'm wanting to know is how many metres of the pipeline are under the seabed? Is it 400 metres?
I think at the moment it's
Under the seabed and dry land, or just seabed?
Just the seabed.
almost 2 kilometres, isn't it?
Yeah, most of it.
No, I think it's the old part that would be under the seabed.
Which is 400 metres.
Which is about 400 metres.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And the new part was laid on the bed, but there has certainly been...
So you can sort of understand the challenge of being able to do any maintenance on that pipe if 400 metres of it is buried, and there needs to be some pretty smart technology to be able to assess its condition.
So the kit they're bringing in not only is a camera, because the camera's only going to show you so much, it's got sensors, etc., which can measure the thickness of the metal, because it's a steel pipe. So all that sort of fancy gear is reasonably new to the game, and it's having to come from outside the region. It's pretty specialist. So I think going forward, the opportunity is to require more of this and employ more of that technology. But over the last 40 years, during which this pipe's been in existence, there will not, in this case or in probably any major pipeline in the region, have had that level of scrutiny.
Yeah, the only foolproof method really is this new technology with I think they call it an intelligent pig or something, which goes down the pipe, because on occasion divers have done like visual inspections, swum along where they believe the pipe is, and you can only like visually see that, and in a lot of cases too, the visibility is not very good. On a couple of occasions, in fact, they've had to abort what they were doing because of visibility, and a lot of cases not even visible enough for them to take pictures of fish life. So it seems to me, just from what I've noted, that the visibility is not great there. And of course, it's not a case of looking outside. It's a great day. Let's throw a diver down. You've actually got to order the diver to come in and do it. There's not a whole lot of them standing on Whirinaki Beach ready to get called to jump into the water.
Hey, Paul, what additional questions have you got? We note your concerns.
Yeah. Just some stuff that came out. So what you see, because this is still, some of it's new information to me, with all the inquiries I've been making, with the paper, with everything that's been in the media, with everyone I've spoken to, there's new stuff that's coming out today, which I'm finding very helpful and interesting. First of all was, James, you mentioned that under the old consent there was no requirement for us to be looking at the maintenance of the pipe, and that's the one down as it was underground.
Correct.
And that's the consent that they're still operating on, because the new outfall pipe hasn't been built.
Under the rollover, the interim consent, correct me if I'm wrong, is mirrors the older consent. And that was for just the 12 months or even less holding position, and that's expired. They're operating under Section 124 rights to continue under that consent, but yeah, the new consent will go live as soon as we resolve all of this Environment Court challenge.
Because that's a confusing part for people to follow, is which consent are we actually working under, and so what conditions are we supposed to be holding the PAMPAC to, or holding ourselves to. So that's cleared up a lot of confusion for me. Thank you for that. The other one was, in that respect, you've also mentioned that PAMPAC have been regularly sending you through maintenance reports on work that they've done.
Yes.
It would have been helpful if, when I had asked that question 2 weeks ago, that you had just said yes, that we've been receiving regular maintenance reports.
Well, the problem with that was it would have been very hard for us to give you put our hands on our hearts and say that was the case 2 weeks ago. I've just gone through like 25 files that thick, through every page. This is all the reports come in, go through them, and it was really only in the last couple of days, we could put a hand on our heart that they've actually been quite anal in the manner in which they've reported. Their reporting is is really quite exceptional.
So some of what we're telling you now is contained in Wayne's report, which was, as he said, delivered to me this morning, and I have read this morning, so I'm telling you as much as we know as of today.
No, sorry, so there was a big file that they've been sending your stuff through, and you're keeping it all on record, but you're not making a regular check to say, okay, we're expecting something from PanPac every quarter or whatever, how often frequently it is.
Yes. No, what happens? The monitoring officer receives those reports and then puts them on the file. So ticks off, yes, they've been received, and puts them on the file. But when I did my investigation, there's no way I'm going to be sitting there and taking someone's word for it. I looked through every page on the file so I can give you an accurate report.
Okay, so hopefully the new IBIS system is going to make it IRIS, whatever.
IRIS,
sorry. Yeah, the IBIS is the first one, isn't it? Is going to make it a lot easier for you to have all that stuff on file for you to be able to locate and research and find that sort of stuff.
It's going to be much easier for us to report on those things, most certainly, yes.
Okay. Now the other question is the. Okay, you went through and looked at the big file and whatever it was, the files, and you started doing that a couple of 3 weeks ago, whenever it was. Was it only a couple of 3 weeks ago?
9th or 10th or 11th of January. Yeah.
January. Okay. So because obviously the discharge had been going on for some time before that.
Yep.
At what point do you make a decision as to say, right, I'm actually going to go through and this is something that's been ongoing for a while, I'm going to go back and have a look at the file and have a look to make sure that the consent holder has dotted the I's and crossed the T's?
It's kind of variable. In this particular situation, when we sat down and had a meeting, and it was decided that we should go down that path.
Okay, because that's one concern that, again, it's another thing that could be raised. My last question, Chair.
Make this a very long meeting.
I'm sorry, but these are important informations to the public, to the community of Whirinaki, and to the people that have bloody been contacting me over the last 2 weeks.
Ask your final question.
I've had a guts full of being told not to talk.
Ask your final question, mate.
Okay. The other one, James, is that some of the communications that the Regional Council has put out about this particular issue, like I say, there's a lot of things that we're finding out now, we found out today, but it doesn't appear to me, looking back through all the media statements that have been made, not particularly constructive in terms of it. It seems to be PanPac's doing this, PanPac's doing that, PanPac's doing everything. We don't seem to be doing anything. I know we are. We're working beavering away in the background, but the perception out there is that we're not. And I think that the way that we communicate these issues with the public needs to be rethought. Is that something we could potentially do?
I have some sympathy with that view. We have put the burden on PanPac to be the primary communicator to the community about what's going on, and they've been proactive in that regard. I think we could have done a better job of explaining what we've been doing alongside them to ensure that they're doing everything that they should be doing. And so that's just a learning for the future.
Okay, right. We have a mover and a seconder to receive and note PanPac report. All those in favour?
Aye. I'd like to say something on it, Chair.
Would like to speak? Okay.
Yes.
So would I, actually.
So would I.
I don't.
Right, we will start with the seconder.
Wayne, thank you to you and Malcolm, your team, for a very concise report.
Paul? Then you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I know this is an issue that's been frustrating for all the parties involved, and I am conscious that PanPac is doing their utmost to resolve the issue. It's unfortunate, I think, that this critical strategic asset of theirs, which is really important to their operation, they haven't actually got a backup on it. Whether that's a second pipe outfall that they could have had, I don't know, but it's to be left with the option of this is the only thing we can do. So we have to keep on doing keep on having the discharge. I think it's a really unfortunate thing for the community to be having to face. What I was really concerned about was that we have an enforcement policy which we put out last year. We've also increased, the last long-term plan, we also increased the resources for the enforcement team, and I was really keen to make sure that in this particular instance and in any further instance that we're actually following this policy and that we're familiar with it. And there are some things in here which I'm concerned about that haven't quite quite been followed to the letter of the policy, mainly around the timing and urgency of these questions trying to be asked. So I just hope that the enforcement team takes that on board. I'm sure that they are looking very carefully at our enforcement policy and that that's what they're following. But I think in this, if you're asking me, do I think you've done enough, or do I think you're falling short in terms of, because it's a measure, it's a balancing thing, and there's a dial in there that's changed, that flips and flops, and every instance is different. I think in this instance, perhaps we could have got in and started the investigation a little bit earlier than what had actually happened. But apart from that, I think you've gone through what you're supposed to have done, and you've been able to answer. And from today, you've been able to answer all those questions in there in terms of the factors to consider when considering enforcement action. And I think you've been going through and getting answers to those, although, like I say, perhaps not in as timely a fashion as I would prefer. But that's just my opinion. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Tom?
Yeah, I'm going to obviously vote to accept the report. I'm convinced that PanPac is doing all that it can be expected to be doing at the moment. I have some concern that neither they nor we have been diligent enough in the past in terms of the integrity of this discharge system, given its the consequences that failure brings if it doesn't work. And so I have a little concern about that. I regard it as in intensive care at the moment, where they're applying a bunch of Band-Aids, hoping that one of them works. I presume that Doug has gone off to Japan with a capital budget in his back pocket that is going to move beyond the Band-Aids to some greater, some more permanent solution to this pipeline. I assume at 47 years that probably something more than Band-Aids might be required, and that it would be fair for us as a council to expect that is in fact what their corporate path will be. And if it's not, then I think it comes back to the table here as to whether or not we're being adequately demanding or vigilant in protecting the public interest in this.
Thank you, Rick.
I want to start with the point that Alan, Councillor Dick made, was that PanPac has a reputation in this community as a pretty solid citizen, and everything it does and has done has been to a high standard and of good quality. So it comes with a very good record. Second thing is that what I've seen of the company also says to me that over the time they do things to the highest standard. The third point I'd like to make here is that in the report that Wayne's given, item 40 says discharge is heavily treated, already considered for discharge in the marine environment. Fourth point I'd make is the DHB is aware of it and has, according to our advice, issued no particular concerns at this stage. So yes, it's a visual problem, it's material which is considered for discharge, it's heavily treated, and it's in an ageing pipe, which probably, when it was put in, the manufacturer said will last 100 years. Now, we know it's going to fail. Well, PanPac have said they're committed to finding a solution as quickly as they can, which is what we want, and I think just expect PanPac will deliver on that. And I'm confident that the monitoring team will keep an eye on them. As for the council being seen much more in the picture of this, I don't want the council to be seen is on the periphery. We're not central to this, we're on the periphery, demanding that people do the job, and that's what we're doing. I don't want to see the council on the beach with shovels digging up the old thing to go and change it. That's not our job. I want the PanPac to take full responsibility. They've said they have, and they will. So I'm happy with it and think there's been a good report.
Thank you. Alan, do you wish to speak, or will we put the motion?
For the sake of timing, I will bypass.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion is that we receive and note the PanPac report. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. So,
minimum flow regime, Councillor Belford.
oh yeah, no, we're on item 7, so discussion minor items. Tuki. Tom, you had 2, and Mohaka.
Yeah, in our most recent little report we get on consent applications, there were a couple of applications in from, I have to find my piece of paper here, from the folks up at the top of the Mohaka there that do dairying. And it just triggered in my mind, I would like to get a report at some point as to where our planned change efforts and so forth. I mean, look, this is Pengzhen.
Shanghai Pengzhen.
They have 2 what look to be pretty significant consent requests in here involving contaminants and pads and what have you. And it just triggered in my mind, I haven't heard for a long time what's going on up there, what degree of monitoring are we doing, where's that particular plan change, so if we can get a sense of that at some point.
Okay, we'll do that as a follow-up. Yep.
And there's a catchment group going on up there, isn't there, that area? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd be really interested in that as well. So, Tuki, we're in a process here, I think, where we gave folks till February 1st to indicate what kind of issues they had with the prospect of a plan change. So again, I saw this after we did our planning for the Environment Committee agenda. I'll go back to Ian, and I just put notice on that I'd like to see a report on what that feedback is that is due February 1st. thank you. Mahia Beach.
Thank you, Chair. Just well, it followed on from your regional parks, which you'll tell us about shortly, but Mokatahi Hill at Mahia has a QE2 covenant over it. It has a lot of Waitapu sites, but they're planting it. And just information to councillors, they've actually put a great big pathway up there now. It's pretty stunning. So they've got a launch for it this Friday, and there's more work to be done. I've sort of indicated I'd like to be involved. I think the regional council, there's a dearth, as in there's no regional parks north of Tangoio. We're putting a hand up and waving at everyone like everyone else, saying pick us. So Mokatahi's one. We could assist them there. I think it would be great.
Okay, that does lead me on to regional parks. I guess I was inspired because regional parks have been on my mind because I've been taking my dog through the park of Whai Park, and I just wanted to say, it's stunning. It really is stunning. What our team has done there is just quite phenomenal. And all of you would have passed through that motorway seeing that Hawke Park is starting to get planted up. So we're going to have 2 very visual regional parks right in that area at the moment. I did lead earlier in the meeting onto the Waitangi Park and the fact that Peter Bevan and I visited the second half of that park, which is not visible from the road. It's worth a walk. You go off the car park and park in the car park and go walk under the bridge. It's quite stunning what our team's done there, and we've got to start figuring out, and I guess they are, and we're putting in a large new wetlands in there as well. How we're going to make that open to the public, because it did rather stun Peter Bevan and I, that the enormity of it really. Wairoa, I'm really keen to start working with the Mayor of Wairoa, and he's got a provincial growth fund thought in his mind, I don't know where he's put it in, about the Esplanade there and a regional park from the combination. So we do need to, and Mahi, that's the first I've heard of that. I'm really keen to have a look at that myself too, Fenton. So there's lots of opportunities. The Mana Ahururi want to do a regional park encompassing all the estuary and lots of other land, so that would just be a huge endeavour, something that we'd be all keen to look at as well. So there's just lots of action around regional parks. It's something that the public really enjoy, and it's a very visible connection that we have to the public. So I just wanted to make that comment. So that's the end of our meeting. Thank you very much. and we want to have a cup of tea before you have your workshop.
Mr. Chairman, is it possible for us to carry on? I mean, we've got people waiting, and I did look at the agendas, and I made an arrangement for 3 o'clock. I'm not going to be able to make that.
You know, that's the end of our official regional council meeting. We'll carry on with our workshop, and then we might close everything all at once, Paddy.
After the workshop on here.
Shall we?
Right, cool.
Yeah.
No, after the workshop.
Yep.
So, thank you, everyone. We need to get on to that.
So given Nick's here, would you like to start with?
Thanks for being very